to the No BS Short-Term Rental Podcast, an unfiltered look into the global vacation and short-term rental industry.
I'm Mateo Bradford.
And I'm John Stokinger.
And this is our podcast. We bring the right people to the table at the right time, giving you an inside view and take on the short-term rental industry like no other podcast can.
Good morning, Mateo. Season 2, episode 11. We are here.
We are. We're
How are
definitely
you?
Here. I'm doing fantastic, brother. How are you?
Good. Our 41st episode, and this one's a big one. I'm pretty excited about our guest, and I think everyone's going to be a little surprised who we're able to snag, and we appreciate him joining us today. But I'll go ahead and let you give an introduction, but I want to get right into it so we get in the meat and potatoes of this interview.
So yeah, we've been excited. I'm excited. I've been excited for this for quite some time. Our industry is made up of unique individuals, as you can see. We've had a podcast, running through 41 episodes of having some amazing interviews with people who have truly impacted our industry, and just from a business standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. And today we're lucky to have a pioneer of someone that's really doing both, has done and continues to do both. So, I'm going to keep this introduction short because I want to dig in and get directly into talking with our guest today, the one and only, the never duplicated or replicated in this space, Carl Shepard. Welcome to the No Bullshit Short-Term Rental Podcast, sir.
Thanks. Is pioneer another way of saying really, really old guy?
No,
I wasn't going to say that.
Look. No. Because it's pioneer is about the impact.
It's true.
It's true.
Impact. It talks about timing and your impact in the space.
Yeah,
you could be a young pioneer. It's
could be, but I got 30 years ago. I could have been a young pioneer, but it's good to be here. It's good to be here.
But Carl, 30 years ago, when you came into this space, or when we're at that time, you weren't a pioneer yet because no one really knew what the hell was going on. It's like, I think like time and maturing, and, basing on the over time is what makes you a pioneer, right?
Well, thanks. But the real pioneers in this industry, though, are Brian and I, Brian Sharples, who started HomeAway, which is now Vrbo, and I, we're not the real pioneers here. The real pioneers were people like Dave Bollinger and Hunter Melville in Vermont, and the Van Voris, Pat and Jan and the late Pat Van Voris in Michigan, David Klaus and his wife Lynn, and Brian Raub and his wife Lisa, and Richard Counsley over in London. The real pioneers were people who looked at this online in the mid-90s and said, there's got to be a better way to rent a vacation home than having to go to the Chamber of Commerce of each city and find somebody to rent it. And that history is a pretty interesting one, but most people don't understand that ground zero for the vacation rental industry is not VRBO. Mm-hmm. It is cyber rentals. Cyber rentals in Ludlow, Vermont is the ground zero in the online vacation rental industry.
That's Ludlow, Vermont. Okemo. I know Vermont. I actually graduated high school in this time in 1996 from Rutland, Vermont. I know Ludlow very well. I used to ski up at Killington and teach skiing and snowboarding up there. So I'm very familiar with that area.
Well, you would have loved the cyber rental offices. They had a room that only 2 people were allowed in at any one time so that you didn't fall through to the basement.
No shit.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
A company called Cyber Rentals.
Yeah. And the technology was done by 2 guys out in California, Washington. And it ran on a MacBook in these guys' apartment. These 2 guys shared an apartment, and the MacBook was cyber rentals, and they were guys that liked to be outside a lot and bike and mountain bike and ski. And if they were gone, for 2 or 3 days, and the server went down. Cyber Rentals was off the air. It was just gone. And that went on for years. But it is ground zero of how you rented a vacation rental. And the first time I walked in those offices, it was like it's a little house on the main street of Ludlow. And it was absolutely covered in Post-it notes. I mean, you thought the wallpaper was Post-it notes because of do this, do that, get this guy, get this, check this, get this piece of information. It was amazing. It was amazing.
That's so interesting. I thought you were going to go that was their tape chart, but that was
no, this was their to-do list, man. They would write stuff on Post-it notes and they'd stick it on everybody's computer, and it was great. Hunter is a Dartmouth grad, and his best friend from the time he was 5 years old is Dave Bollinger, and they started the online vacation rental industry.
So how long from that cyber rentals until your involvement in your start of HomeAway? What is how does Carl Shepard stumble into this? I mean, no one really stumbles, but like, how do you say, you know what, this is what we're doing?
Stumble is a good way. Okay, so I had been the chief operating officer of a company here in Austin called Hoovers Online. I have 25 years previous experience in publishing, but publishing with paper and ink and printing presses. That's right. That whole thing. And we had taken this company called Hoovers and business information, and we did for $9 a month what Dun & Bradstreet and Standard & Poor's charged $300,000 a year for. So we were kind of renegades, and they didn't like us a whole lot. But we took that company public and sold it in 2003 to Dun & Bradstreet because they finally figured out they couldn't beat us, so they might as well own us. I retired. I had a kid going.
And speaking of, you've done that a few times.
I've done it a few times.
Okay.
But I had a kid going into Dartmouth and a at the time 5-year-old with Down syndrome going into the public school system.
Okay.
So I thought that the best thing for me to do right now is to be a thorn in the side of the Ames School District. And I realized after a few months that I was a good thorn in the side, but my wife was a friggin' monster. And that the best thing to do was to get out of the way. She also explained to me one day, casually, that because I was at home, and she said, if you're not gonna work, you can't keep the nanny and the maid. So I thought, okay, that's real work now. If I'm gonna have to actually take care of Jack, that's a different thing than being able to say to the nanny. So I started looking for some things to do. The whole idea was it could be part-time. And I met Brian Sharples, and we were put together by Austin Ventures, which was a large venture capital firm that is no longer funding new things. They've been in the wind down process for a while now. But Austin Ventures was one of the first venture capital companies to actually do things in Texas. Knew all those guys from way back, and they put me in contact with Brian because they were looking at something for Brian, who was had done a similar path. He had followed a similar path where he'd taken a company public, he'd sold it, and he'd taken 2 years off because he had little kids.
Okay.
He had a 12-year-old, but he also had like an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So they had traveled, and they wanted the business that Austin Venture picked out for him was an information business. So they called me to ask me to go look at this information business with Brian and see if it was a good business. And we had coffee at Starbucks, and I said, I've read the white paper. This is just dreadful. And every day you'd have to wake up in Houston, Texas. I mean, there's nothing more painful than that combination of a dreadful business in Houston, Texas. I don't care how much money it makes. And he said, thank God. Yes, it's a horrible business, but what do you really want to do? And he said, well, I've been noodling with this. And he had done a test on his own dime to start a business called Elysium, which he never got off the ground, but because Steve Case beat him to it with exclusive resorts.
Okay.
And so, but Brian had done all this research on the vacation rental industry. And the reason was that, you know, when you have kids as disparate as ours were, you know, my kids that were 12 years apart from top to bottom. And I used to make the joke that I had to have the, you know, Sesame Street on one television and the Playboy channel on another. I had to bridge that gap, right?
We have a 10-year gap on ours. My oldest is 19, my youngest is 9. And
there you go. There you go. It's kind of, you kind of have to deal with it. I also had the problem that if I put Jack, the baby, in the same room with Kevin and Connor, there was a 50% likelihood that I would only have 2 children in the morning when I went to get
Good
them.
points.
So,
right.
I decided that this traveling and keeping Jack in our room was not good, and we started using vacation rentals. And long story short, Brian and I talked about that. We both like vacation rentals. So what we decided to do was apply the Hoover's method of data collection and reporting to the vacation rental industry, which we knew nothing about.
Right.
But we knew it was kind of disparate, and at the best data that was available at the time came from the Gaylord Enterprises public filings, because they owned Resort Quest was what they owned, and they had, when they bought it, that was the last time that there was any independent information about the industry, because as soon as they bought Resort Quest, they stopped reporting on it. They just consumed it and they didn't need to report.
Makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So the Resort Quest stuff that we looked at said there were 250,000 second homes available for rent in the United States. And Resort Quest had about 10% of them. And that was the industry. And we looked at that and said, well, gee, that doesn't seem like it's the industry. Because we were looking at all these little websites. We saw cyber rentals, we saw VRBO, we saw these sites, and we didn't believe any of those companies made money.
Right.
We just thought they were, how can you make money doing what they did? I mean, and they were so badly done. The websites were all, except for Great Rentals, they were all really, really badly done. And we thought that can't possibly be true, that there's only this many. So we realized that what we wanted to do was have the cover editorially the 50,000 most interesting companies, vacation rentals in the world. And then you could rent them. And we were going to talk about them very much along the lines of a Hideaways or an Andrew Harper or something like that. It was going to be a quasi-publication. And the thing that had made Hoover's work was that we needed, at Hoover's, we needed to have an answer for every company in the world, even though we knew the public was only interested in about 15,000 companies. So, but on that rare occasion, someone wanted to find out about Tom's Texaco on the corner of Shoal Creek and whatever, you needed to know something about it. So we licensed that data from Dun & Bradstreet, who eventually bought Hoover's. We then turned around and looked at this at HomeAway and said, okay, we need to have an answer, no matter, even if it's not one of our houses, we need to have an answer. So let's go license the content of all these little websites, and we'll send them traffic because they can't make money anyway. So, we'll just go license them. So we met them in Depot Bay, Oregon. They happen to actively meet once a quarter. VRBO, Great Rentals, Cyber Rentals, and A1 Vacations. And they'd play poker all weekend, and the wives would shop, and they'd stay in one vacation rental, and they're all super people. Yeah. So we went out there to meet them, and Brian had a pitch deck, and Brian is like central friggin' casting. If you want to see, he's tall, he's good looking, he's got great teeth, and he's really well spoken and he's well educated, yada yada yada. So he gives our presentation, and one of the women begins to cry. I mean, in the middle of his presentation, she starts crying. I'm going, this is odd.
Yeah.
And I asked her why she was crying, and she said, because I realized it was all over, that you had found us, and that our life of just making money and rocking along, that had ended, because now money had found the vacation rental industry. We had $50 million at our disposal, because that's what Austin Ventures had given us. And we could do anything we wanted to. And we told them we had $50 million. Right. And these guys had all bootstrapped, man. This was all heavy lifting over 10 years.
So this is obviously the first capital they had seen thrown their way. It was just, everything was 100% organic, bootstrapped. And now they're like, holy shit. Like,
right. And the only reason the four of them knew each other is there was a bank called Robertson Stevenson. And you guys are too young to remember it, but all the old people will remember Robbie Stevenson. And their claim to fame during website 1.0, Web 1.0, was that they would go get disparate companies, they'd put them together, and they'd take them public, even though they were losing shitloads of money. Okay. And Robbie Stevenson had put together a plan to take these four companies, combine them, and take them public. And that, of course, had fallen through when the web collapsed.
Right.
And that's why they knew each other. And but they all did the same thing, and they all did subscriptions. And we talked, and during that meeting at Depot Bay, we asked them if there's, if we could talk to them about licensing. And we would go out. I mean, it's hysterical to think about it. We had to go outside. It was the only private place on the coast of Oregon, with that wind coming off the Pacific Ocean, and it was 50 degrees, and we were in the backyard, talking to these guys, and one by one they said, we're not interested in licensing the content, but if you want to buy us, that'd be fine. And I said, well, go talk. We'll think about that. Can you just give me your top line numbers? And they said, the first one said, oh, we make about I'm not going to tell you which company. Oh, we do about $4 million in revenue. I said, okay, what's your EBITDA? And they said, well, what is EBITDA? And well, how much cash do you get at the end of it? And they said, oh, we do about 4 million revenue. I guess we do about 3.5 in cash.
Wow.
And I'm going, wow, what?
Your mind was blown.
Right. Mind totally blown. And so each one of them was saying that. And
we
meet all four of them. And the only one who isn't interested in selling is VRBO, Dave Klaus at VRBO. And his numbers, which I won't share, were like, I'd never heard numbers like that. They were so, the percentage of profitability was just
So Vrbo or VRBO back then, their numbers were exponentially higher than the other three.
Yes.
Wow.
Exponential. Wow. Because Dave did, they did nothing. They just took your subscription. They had no staff. There was nothing. They had no marketing. They had nothing. They didn't even keep an address of the email address of the person who inquired. They did nothing.
Wow.
So
they're just a pass through then. That's it.
They're just a total pass through. But they made shit tons of money. I guess I shouldn't say shit tons, but that's
you cannot on here.
On the no bullshit podcast, you can definitely say that.
So we get back in the car to go back to the airport. We're driving down the highway, Brian's driving, and we're going, holy crap. I mean, we completely misjudged that this is what the industry wants. This professional industry doesn't like these guys, but they cheat and advertise on them because they have to.
Yep.
And the public documentation has completely missed the fact that people who rent their homes for less than 50 weeks a year. In other words, the IRS thing was, you buy your second home, you can use it 2 weeks, 50 weeks a year. If it's for rent, you get to deduct it, right? That's the way it works. But none of these people were doing this because they wanted to actually use their homes,
right,
and their second homes. And that was the difference. And we had no idea how many there were, but we could look at the growth rates of these companies. We couldn't do it at that point in time, but we eventually were able to, and say, well, shit, we don't know what the top number is, but it's growing at VRBO at 85% a year. It's subscription based, right? So, and cyber rentals were growing something like a 70% a year, and they were just and they were not duplicated. This is just people finding them. So Brian pulls off the highway, and he turns to me, he says, Carl, let's just buy those guys. And that was it. Yeah. We got back in the plane. We went back to Austin. We went to meet our venture capitalist overlords. We said, got good news for you. We're not going to be starting anything. We're just going to buy these companies. And we went out and bought 3 of them. A1 Vacations, Great Rentals.
Well, 3 for now.
3 for now. And then we found Holiday Rentals in London.
Okay.
Holiday Rentals actually had technology because everybody else did not. But the guy at Holiday Rentals it was written on a piece of crap software, but it was logical. It was good. It would you could stress it a little bit. It wasn't going to work for us long term, but we could get started with it. So we bought those 4 companies on the first day of HomeAway, and a fifth one that we quickly realized we had a problem with because it was focused on the professional industry.
Okay.
And we didn't know at the time about the Hatfields and McCoys. We didn't understand that the professionals hated the people that made it possible for them to be in business.
So this is 2005. This is the
2005.
2004, but officially to March 2005 is when HomeAway is like, you got 5 companies that are all under your belt now. There, you have some tech that's decent, at least enough to get you going, and you're off to the races.
Right. So and after that, we ran through we put a plan in front of the VCs. It had a 5-year plan. We beat the 5-year plan about 7 months into our life. And we said, well, the hell with this. We're just going to have to run the table. And I started buying everything that wasn't not nailed down. I got on an airplane. We hired a guy to be chief operating officer. And I got on an airplane and started flying around the world buying websites. I bought 23 of them.
Wow.
All doing the same thing.
Well, if looking back at those 23 acquisitions that you did, what was, we know about VRBO and that, but outside of VRBO, what was the biggest, most instrumental acquisition that HomeAway did that really, and we know that first 7 months you already meet your goal. So we already know you're making it crazy numbers.
We were profitable the afternoon we closed on all the companies.
Right. 100%. So, but what is when you're looking back now, there's always things wow, that was amazing. Well, we did some really amazing things, or oh, we shouldn't have done that. Or, of those 23 acquisitions, which one was a surprise to you? That was it worked so well.
Or didn't work.
I think it wouldn't be a surprise, but VRBO was the one that worked very well.
Yeah.
And they came to it. It was in 20. We had just had done a deal to buy Abritel in France, and we had looked at another company called Homely Days in Paris, but there was this little company in France called Abritel, and that was I walked into that office in Marseille, and it reminded me of cyber rentals, but that was one where we were realizing that we could grow into different languages quickly. So that was one that I'd marked. And we had the deal to buy them when Dave Klaus called me one day, and he said, Carl, you said one time you would like to buy me. And I said, yeah, I'd love to buy you. And he'd say, well, will you pay X? Which was a big number.
Right.
And I said, well, sure, Dave, I'll pay X. And he said, well, great. When do you want it? Well, what's the next step? And I said, well, I'll send you a term sheet and we'll get the lawyer started. But yeah, I'll pay X. And I walked into Brian's office and I said, I have good news and bad news. And the good news is I just have a deal to buy Vrbo, for X. And the bad news is we don't have X. We don't have that money. So you need to go get me X. And X was, a big friggin' number.
Right.
So,
but you knew.
I'm sorry?
But you knew it was, yeah.
We knew. So we ended up, that was a hard acquisition to do because as I mentioned, these companies were not companies really.
Right.
Vrbo was in 5 different LLCs. There were no financial statements. There were no records, only tax returns, nothing. We had to create 3 years worth of financial statements out of whole cloth and send in forensic accountants to do all that. But I knew that because of how VRBO was, every bit of their profitability would drop to our bottom line. We didn't need to hire another person. We didn't need to do anything. We just bought that. So the most consequential acquisition was Vrbo. The next ones that I'd say were the most strategic were the software companies. And the software companies, it's a little known fact, but well, I can say it now. The professionals hated us. I mean, VRMA, my memory of my first VRMA meeting is that I went to meet with the board before VRMA started. So
when was this? Just to kind of put a little time stamp.
2005.
Okay. Who was the president back then?
I can't even remember.
Okay.
I can't remember. But I remember that I made the presentation saying, this is who we are, this is what we do. And they said, but you don't understand. You are empowering our owners to cheat us. And I'm saying, no, but without your owners, you're nothing. And if your owners are advertising independently, it's because you're not doing a good job. If your professionals are not meeting the needs of their owners, that's not my problem. I'm the messenger telling you that I am 50 times bigger than you, and I've only been in business for 5 months.
Right.
And you guys are sitting here talking like you are that I'm scum. And so I make the presentation, I leave. I then get into an elevator with one of the board members, very large guy, you can't miss him. He's a very big guy. I get into the elevator. We're the only 2 people in the elevator. He turns his back to me and looks in the corner.
Wow.
That was my reception at VRMA.
Wow.
Wait, like a kid that doesn't want to talk to you, turned
Yes.
or like a little, like he's pouting?
Absolutely. I don't like you, blah, 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 blah. So we went through a few years with VRMA, and they could not understand that technology was driving this and that the users were driving this. The industry was being driven to owner managed properties, and they didn't have the wherewithal to look internally to say, what are we doing wrong? Why are we delivering such a bad service that our owners leave us? That's the question they should have been asking. Right. But the question that they were asking was, can we shut down HomeAway because it competes with us?
Yeah, instead of putting the guest first and putting the experience first, you're going to go ahead and that brings back to that whole Hatfield and McCoy's kind of mindset that you alluded to earlier. The professionally managed, and then these independent homeowners doing their thing.
And they cast such bad. It was the prejudice that was amazing. I would say to them, okay, we have done surveys. And the surveys we have done at that time, I don't know what the surveys would say today, I'm out of it. But the surveys at the time said, if people expressed a preference, travelers, if they expressed a preference, they preferred an owner-managed property. Why is that? And it's because an owner-managed property is managed by a family. And are y'all married?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
a wife, and mama's not going to live in a dump. Mama's not going to, it's going to be nice.
Yeah.
And they were a lot nicer. Owner managed properties were just nicer because they weren't done for profit. They were done for love. And that's what was driving this industry, is that people were saying, okay, I'll share my house with people 8 to 12 times a year.
Right.
And I'll offset my cost, but that's my house. I go a lot. And if I don't go, my in-laws go, or my brother and sister goes. But they didn't want to rent it 50 times a year. And the property managers were saying, it's a 50-week contract or you can't be here. Right. So
this is the key, utilizing this technology and this new tech at this time was the key to go ahead and for the homeowners at that time to use their vacation rentals, very literal vacation rentals, in the way that they want to do it, and then offer it 6, 7, 8 times, weeks a year out to other people,
right,
and recoup some of that cost.
And recoup, but what was important about the number of times is that the industry reported about availability based on 50 weeks a year. Okay. Right. And they would say that we're only 25% occupied. Well, someone who only rented 18 times a year, that's only all she wanted to rent. And she could rent all 18 of those weeks on HomeAway.
That's 100% occupied.
100% occupied.
Yeah.
Right.
And she was thrilled. And 18 weeks a year would not have been worth it to a property manager. So they were at war. And so you've got all this stuff that was going on. So when getting to the consequential acquisitions, I don't think people understood at the time that the software companies that supported all the professional industry, there were only 2 or 3 of them. They were all precarious. Escapia was hours away from being shut down, and being shut down in such a way that this property manager who uses it, it's gone.
Wow.
Yeah. Like on a morning, there's none of your data is there anymore. It's gone. Escapia was on fumes. Wonderful people. They had bet wrong, and they had the wrong venture capitalists who didn't see this industry was really growing. They needed to keep going. And we got a great guy out of Escapia. One of our leading managers came from Escapia. And then the other business was Instant Software, and Instant Software was a good group of people. Basically, they had some idiosyncrasies, but a good group of people. Their biggest problem was that they could not say no to their customer base. So they had almost infinite versions of every piece of software that they had, and they had like 8 pieces of software. So the house of cards was just teetering.
Right.
Both of those companies, because there was no way to maintain the software base at Instant Software.
So this is the birth of HASP then?
The HomeAway software, yes, that's true. Yeah. So strategically, Brian and I were talking one day, and I said, if these companies go out of business, we'll never get the professional properties on our services, because we can't do ones and twosies. They can't come in and just put a listing up. They have to put 100 listings, and we have to be integrated with the software. So we bought those companies because they were not profitable. They were not good businesses. They were wonderful people, but they weren't good businesses. And we had to buy those, because if we didn't, then you would have almost the entirety of the professional vacation rental industry without software instantly.
Right.
So we bought, I think that was critical. And I don't think the industry ever knew how close they were to implosion. And so that was one. So I think those were the 2 most consequential.
And V12 was in there at some point, correct? I mean, what
V12,
time?
It was a myth. V12 was not released. I mean, V12 had been under development for like centuries. I'm being sarcastic, but it still hadn't been released. We didn't get it released until 18 months after we bought them.
Okay.
Because we had to eliminate over 1.5 million lines of code from V12.
Oh, wow.
So you got some real clean code there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't stop, because the people, half of their base, Instant Software's base, was using First Resorts, which was DOS based.
Right.
Literally on a floppy. And at night they turned off their computer and you couldn't book a property.
It's insane.
It was insane.
Yeah.
And this was in 2010.
Yeah. It's still holy.
So it's like those were the two. I think if you look at what happened to the industry, those were the most consequential acquisitions.
So sorry. Let me
clear you started a tidal wave, right? With what you were doing, bringing, we talk a lot about the journey that the industry faces, from becoming cottage and, homegrown and, this family-oriented, family-driven business that, escaped the laws of business physics and everything else and survived, for generations, coming into an era that is what we've been talking about this whole time. That's data-driven, right? That's technology forward, that, purports that it doesn't want to lose, the parts that make our industry great, that piece, but uses technology every day from this function to make that process smoother. Now, I call it a tidal wave because hearing you say everything from hearing that woman cry to, these house of cards that were stood up to, businesses that were bought that were not profitable. These are themes, right? Like we can go back and look at, even in the past 5 years and the 6 years that I've been in space, that are pillars that I hear again, right? You see businesses, you see venture coming in, throwing in money to businesses that are not profitable, and people stand back and are like, what the hell's going on? Why is this happening? How is this happening? Data, which I really want to dig into the value, because that's what I don't think people are understanding. Hearing your story and how you came in, data was the key. Data was the goal. Data was the value in that space. Looking at where your background and where you come from, that was not my idea of where this was going to go. But data, that's the goal. Where do we go from here? How do we get this part? Where does this clean up? Because that's...
I think data is certainly part of it. Knowing where your customers are going, how much you can charge, and all of that stuff is the professionalism of the industry. And I had a very interesting experience. My wife and I popped the other day. We just got crazy and we said, we're going to go to Palm Springs and hike at Joshua Tree. So we'll stay in Palm Springs and we'll get a Vrbo and we'll stay there and we'll, hike every day. And I went online, and for the first time in my life, Vrbo was more expensive than a resort. Much more.
Now, is that after fees? And is that after everything that goes into
that's
it?
After everything. Vrbo was about 50% more than I could stay at a resort in Palm Springs. And we don't, dirty little secret about one of the founders of the industry is that we don't use a kitchen except barely. I mean, my wife says that if she has to cook, it ain't a vacation. And so we do not cook. We do not use the kitchen. We did use it for breakfast stuff so that the kids could wake up and eat. But without us, we eat out. So you have to take that as a given that the kitchen isn't important to me at a Vrbo. What was always important to me was the space and the quality.
Right.
Yeah.
But when it's just two of us and the 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom house in Palm Springs is going to cost more than staying at the Omni Mirage, I stayed at the Omni Mirage because that worked better for me right now. I think that's one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years in the industry is that data is moving this more expensive up more expensively. The other thing that data is doing is bringing different types of operators in. And they are operators who are trying all sorts of things. We all saw how Zonder tried to make their model work, but there's all, and they're still trying. I don't know what their model is now, but But I think that's what the data-driven young millennials are trying to bring to this industry is how do we choose the right place and how do we get the right. At the end of the day, this is still an industry that requires you to have a license. It requires you to pay taxes. It requires infrastructure that data does help on, but it's still a hospitality industry. Yeah. And I think we have now, I'm wondering if we have now crossed over in the industry to such a point that we are competitive with hotels. Because we got to say at HomeAway when I was driving it up, that not only can you have a house and have a pool and have your own space, it's cheaper than going to a hotel. We got to say that. You can't say that anymore. And because, and that's,
well, I think there's lots of different pieces to that too. I think that, we can't, and I hate to bring this up most episode, but you can't oversight what COVID and the pandemic has done and looking at travel and comfortably, like most families that, there was a time that, hey, hotels are fine now, and it's changed again. Obviously we're post-pandemic, we're coming out of it. There's still issues, but I think that there was a big trend towards vacation rentals, obviously, at the beginning of this pandemic, and that trend is still staying that way.
Yeah, true. But the other thing the pandemic did is it eliminated the ability to go overseas. So it's not just the travel industry. And I don't think people realized what was going to happen when the pandemic started, because I was on the board of Turnkey at the time. And we had a meeting, an emergency meeting, and said, what in the hell is going to happen here? Because the cancellations were just flowing. And then people began to realize that their kids had come home. And then they began to realize that they could go to a vacation rental because if they're going to work someplace, they might as well go work on the coast.
Right.
And because they were social distancing. It was, if you live in an apartment building in New York City and you could go to a vacation rental in Vermont, even though it was cold, your kids were safer in Vermont in a vacation rental than they were in the city. That was one thing that was happening. But then you had the fact that you can't leave the country. So Vrbo did amazing. Airbnb did okay, because remember, Airbnb's largest inventory mass at that time when the pandemic started was cities.
Right.
Yeah.
And people didn't want to go to cities. They wanted to stay as far away from the city as they could. So Vrbo did amazing, and and I think in country, it was all in country travel. It needed bigger countries. You can travel within Germany, so they did fine. You can travel within France, they did fine. You could travel within England, they did fine. The smaller countries didn't do so well, and of course, no one went to Italy because even the Italians didn't want to be in Italy. So that I think we all have to look at 2020 and 2021 and the first half of 2022 and say this really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and you can't look at it for projecting in the forward. What it did do is it may have increased occupancy a little bit, but at this point, 80% of travelers have experienced a vacation rental. Right. They're going to keep going. Now, will they keep going over going to resorts? That's what I wouldn't make that bet. I think when things get going again, I think Disney shows us. Disney hotels are full. Yeah. Because they're the right thing to do when you go to Disney. It's if you can afford to stay on campus in Disney, there's no experience like that, right? There's a vacation rental can't duplicate that. So I think we haven't seen what's going to happen in 2023, but my advice to any travel business, I'm on the board of HostelWorld as well, is you can't look at 2021, 2022 as anything other than, well, damn, that happened. What does it mean going forward? I don't know.
Well, you're talking, the end of 2022, you're talking 2023. What companies or what movements do you see are making a splash in the right direction in in your eyes as far as, where things are going and what should be, what should the industry be looking out for?
I think if people can travel again, there are lots of things being thrown out there. I personally do not believe that business travel is dead.
Agree.
I think that the first time a sale is made because someone didn't do it on Zoom and actually flew to the client's office and took him out to lunch, that we'll be back to people traveling for business, because business people want to win. And if they can't win on Zoom, if every meeting has to be held on Zoom, so be it. But if someone's going to come and actually take you to a Lakers game,
yeah,
that guy's going to get the business. And that's the way it's always been. And that's the way it's going to be. So I believe business travel will come back in 2023. I think hotels will come back in 2023, because there is something to the idea of staying for couples, especially. Hotels are wonderful. I mean, vacation rentals are great for families and groups traveling together. There's no better thing. But, you're not going to ever get me personally. I was looking at these vacation rentals on the Outer Banks of North Carolina and some of them in Florida now, which are, 28-room houses that can be rented all together, or, well, screw that. I'm never going to do that. That's the worst of all worlds, right? So I just don't know what trend is going to develop. I think hotels is going to come back. I believe you may see a flattening of our industry, the vacation rental industry, because when people have more options again, they're going to have more options. I'm on one of the boards I'm on has a overlap with a guy who is with Ryanair and in Europe. And Ryanair, we can shake our heads about it, but it's the way Europeans travel, and it's the way they get to Spain. It's the way the taxi driver in London can afford to use his flat in Spain is Ryanair.
Right.
And they are the leading indicator to me right now, because as Europe opens up, Ryanair is opening up, and they are sending out full planes. So I believe you're going to see a return to some sort of normalcy. And if you couple that with this decision that the United States is making, and we're not alone, is that we don't care anymore. It's over.
Yeah.
And what's tacitly, we don't like to say the second part of it, which is the unvaccinated people are dying. Okay, That's their choice. I mean, that really is what we're saying when we say it's all over. I think that's going on all around the world. So will 2023 be a normal year? I think it will be headed that. Whether it will over-index on any one thing, I don't know. I don't think it will over-index in our industry, though. I think our industry is going to suffer, because if people, not a lot, but if people can go stay in a 4-star resort or 5-star resort in Aspen, Colorado, they will.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to look at it in a way, when I travel by myself for business, I never go stay in a vacation rental, even though I work in this space, because it's just not easy for me. I want to be able to go get quickly in and out and have things done for me, and because time is precious. And there's a lot of positives with the VR space, of course. And anytime I go with the family, that's where we always go. But you had a great point when the vacation rental is, when you're going to Palm Springs and your vacation rental, that for your, if it's just 2 of you or even 3 of you, a hotel or a resort, and you're going to have those amenities and all that there, and it's less expensive, is that going to go ahead and cap those pricing? Are we going to see prices like more equal, seeing some sort of equilibrium?
Index of demand, John. I mean, that everybody who can travel the United States would travel to a drive-to location that they could get to within a day and stay in a vacation rental, because it was the safest. I'm sure that 90% of those people liked it, but I'm also sure that at least 10 or 15% of those people did it because their only option was to do that.
Right.
And if they could have stayed at that there's a beautiful resort in Hawaii that we usually would book in whenever we would go to Hawaii. We'd stay in a vacation rental for 7 days, and we'd stay for 10 or 12, and we'd bookend it with resorts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that, because they had all the stuff the kids like to do, the slides and, you know, that sort of stuff. You know, that was empty because people didn't want to stay there. It's not going to be empty anymore.
No.
So I think our industry needs to look at this to say, we had a great couple of years. Thank God we got to benefit and make money during the pandemic. But are our prices too high? Time will tell. Data, to Matea's point, says that they are. I think that in my point of view, there's a lot of inventory out there right now. There's a lot of people came into this industry in the last year because it looked like the right place to be, right? Well, you came into this industry thinking this was our year. This is a typical year. What if this year is overinflated by 20%? That's a lot of.
And you got people like Chesky that were out there saying, "Hey, we don't have enough inventory," so it's drawing more people saying, "Oh, wow, this wave is they need us and they need more." But what you see is happening on the back end of it. Hotels are learning. You're seeing all kind of hybrids in the space. You know, John and I go back and forth about urban versus traditional vacation rental, and the taking tips from both sides and the morphing of this. You know, you talk about the work world. Well, what does that even mean coming out of 2021 and going to 2022? What is that going to be looking like, right? You have all that's going on there, how people working, where they're working, offices closed, like all of these things play into our space now.
They are.
I don't think we.
But Matea, I would say let's look at a couple of other trends. I mean, here in Austin, Google has just opened or will open soon a building that houses 3,000 people. Oracle is moving a campus here. Apple is opening another building that will take their campus that they're saying is going to be here will be 15,000 people. They're not investing in buildings because they don't expect people to be at their desk.
Yeah.
I mean, and so you can read all these people saying they're not going to go back to work, but it's a very highly specialized person who can really work many ways. It's an individual contributor, and I'm going to add that and say it's an individual contributor who doesn't have a wife, you know, because when you can't take a family unless you're going to homeschool. You can't take your kids around the country as nomads. We could do that in 2021 and 2022 because the schools were closed.
Yeah.
Now the schools aren't open. The soccer teams on weekends. That's going to change back the pattern because if you've got young kids, I grew through it. Thank God I'm done with it. My weekends weren't mine. My weekends, I slept from game to game.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what I did. I drove. And I think that we have forgotten normalcy, and normalcy will come back to us. And yes, there will be adjustments.
Right.
Yes, people will work from home and it won't be the end of your career. But this notion that you don't have to show up and be seen and contribute at business, that's a big notion. When no one's showing up, it's okay.
Yeah.
But we all know the brown noser who will show up every day. He's going to be there.
It's Mateo.
What's happening? Well, no, shit. Not on your life, man. You're crazy if you think that's me. That's the anti-me. But it's interesting because the same thing has happened in Atlanta. Airbnb just built a huge hub. Google's building a huge hub. Microsoft just built a huge regional hub here. Like, the building is going crazy. And the one thing I do notice is I haven't seen commercial real estate, you know, ringing the alarm. Like, I've heard their worries, but I see the cranes, right? And so I see the cranes, I see the building, but it's not on par with the messaging. Because I know people that work for these too, and they're like, oh yeah, Google's extending its work at home policy, but it's building a huge skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. Right. So it's like, where is this? Like, I feel there's going to be this point where they're going to turn that switch and be like, oh yeah, well, we do need you in the office.
I don't even think the switch has to turn. I just think that human nature is such that, you know, well, I'll give this example. HostelWorld Great little company in Dublin, Ireland. Totally virtual for 2 years now. Our new employees are adrift. They don't feel part of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, when we do our employee surveys, they don't think that anything has changed. Now, in Ireland, you have a very unique thing that we don't have in the States, but you stay with your family until you're married, basically. You don't go out and live on your own. Mm-hmm. So these kids are 23 years old, living with their mom and dad in their room, working for HostelWorld. What has changed for them? So we have a real problem as a company of how we assimilate those people into the mothership and how we make them feel part of something that's bigger, because they're not. Yeah. That's going to need to be important, and that's not going to be isolated to HostelWorld. New people are coming into the job market every day, and they don't want to be adrift. They want something in their life to change. I don't think we can predict how all this is changing, because all you have is current, in the moment anecdotes. Right. But long term, I think we're going to see in travel, business travel is going to return. I think we're going to see a more equitable distribution between hotels and vacation rentals.
Agree.
Will it go back to what it was? No, because too many people have experienced a vacation rental, and they are the absolute perfect thing for families and groups traveling together, right? So that's not going to change. I can tell you, and this isn't out of school, when a market in Europe opens up, hostels sell out. Okay. You don't get more socially undistanced.
No, you're there
in a hostel. Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So, and they sell out as soon as you can get to them. Right. Amazing. So the human desire to travel, to experience, to do things, isn't limited to a single category of lodging.
Right.
Agree. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Carl,
it's who we are. Even on the work side, like I don't like working at home all the time. Like, it's cool, but like, and I know that I'm just speaking for myself, but if I don't leave my house, I'm gonna go damn crazy.
Yeah. So I tell my kids that I feel very fortunate that I don't have to have the life that they have.
Hey, Carl, I know we're at time. I know you guys someplace you want to go. Thank you so much. I would love to make a part 2. We didn't even talk your special purchase acquisition company. We never talked SPAC, and I know it's like your favorite topic. We'd love to have you back on soon if you join us, and we can do a part 2, and we can kind of talk current moving forward and in some of that stuff you're doing if you join us.
Just send an invite. As I say, I'm an old retired guy, and when I'm not traveling, I'm available.
Well, perfect. We'll get you on soon for part 2 of this. And thank you so much for joining us.
All right. You guys take care.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Carl. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.